Hi, my name is Rowena, and while I was serving overseas, my husband filed for divorce, without a word. But that wasn't the worst part. He emptied our savings, forged my name, and moved someone else into our home, with my dog. You ever feel like your life was rewritten behind your back? Stick around, because what I uncovered next will make you question who you really trust. And hey, before we dive in, what time are you watching this and where from? Drop it in the comments. I'd love to know. It had been raining all day in Bucharest, the kind of cold drizzle that seeps through your sleeves and clings to your skin. After a 14-hour shift in the NATO contractor bunker, I walked back to my apartment with my boots soaked, my shoulders tight, and my head pounding. I didn't even notice how quiet the city had gotten until I stepped into my building. No sirens, no chatter in the stairwell, just the dull hum of hallway lights and the slap of wet soles on tile. Inside my flat, everything was still. I peeled off my jacket, hung it by the door, and dropped my bag onto the couch. I reached for the kettle, ready to lose myself in peppermint steam and silence. That's when my phone buzzed. One new email. Subject: "Let's be adults about this." It was from Curtis, my husband. No, my soon-to-be ex-husband, apparently. I opened the email without a second thought, assuming it was a grocery list or some random forwarded joke. Instead, it read, "Rowena, I've filed for divorce. I've already emptied our joint account. The house has been handled. Let's be adults about this." There was a PDF attached. I just stood there blinking at the screen. My eyes didn't move. I read those 4 lines over and over again. Not a single apology. No explanation. Not even a damn "take care." My fingers hovered over the reply button, but I didn't write back. What would I even say? The silence filled the kitchen like floodwater, pressing against my ribs. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I turned off the stove, walked into the bathroom, and stood under the shower until the water ran cold. Later, I crawled into bed fully clothed, damp hair soaking into the pillow. I stared at the ceiling fan, blinking in sync with its slow rotation. Still, not a single tear. I was hollowed out. The next morning, I opened my laptop. My hand shook slightly as I logged into our joint bank account. I wasn't sure what I expected. Maybe a few hundred left out of decency. The balance? 31 cents. It felt like being slapped. My breath caught mid-chest. I checked the transaction history. At first, I thought it was a glitch, but no. He'd started transferring money out weeks ago. Small amounts at first. $120 here, $300 there, then $5,200, $12,000. Just days before I left for Romania, he moved $40,000 to a different bank. He'd planned this. The realization cut deeper than the email. The betrayal wasn't spontaneous. It was calculated. I scrolled through the records, watching our life drain away, line by digital line. He didn't even wait until I was gone. He started bleeding us dry while I was still hugging him goodbye at the airport. I closed the laptop, my stomach twisting. Then something else hit me. The last time I saw him, he'd smiled, kissed my forehead and told me to stay safe, okay? He even asked if I'd remembered my allergy meds. What kind of man says that while stabbing you in the back? Curtis always had a way of sounding sincere. He could lie while looking you straight in the eye, hand on your shoulder. Maybe that's why people liked him. I used to like him too. God help me, I loved him. But now, I was looking at a stranger's fingerprints all over my finances and my future. I shoved my phone into my pocket and grabbed my coat. The cold air slapped me as I stepped outside. It was still drizzling, but I walked without an umbrella, letting the water soak my collar. I didn't care. I needed air. I needed to think. And more than that, I needed answers. Curtis thought he'd silenced me by sending a PDF. He didn't realize I wasn't the kind of woman who begged. As I wandered the cobbled streets, passing coffee shops and shuttered kiosks, I started making a list in my head. Not of regrets, not of lost time. A list of everything he didn't know I knew. The passwords he forgot I still had. The documents he assumed I'd deleted. The contacts I'd made when we first bought the house. Legal, financial, private. If he thought I was just going to roll over and sign his papers, he didn't know me at all. By the time I got back to my apartment, my boots were heavier, my mind lighter. My grief had quieted, replaced by something colder, Focus. The game had started, and I wasn't the pawn he left behind. The next night, after hours of pacing and combing through our drained bank account records, I found myself staring at my phone, fingers hovering over the home security app. I didn't even know why I tapped it. Maybe I wanted proof that the house was empty. Silent, like the future Curtis handed me without a conversation. Or maybe some part of me already knew there'd be more. The screen loaded slowly on the hotel Wi-Fi. My thumb tapped into the camera feed labeled Kitchen Entry. At first, it was just the usual grainy view. Dark counters, fridge hum, nothing out of the ordinary. Then, movement. A man walked into frame barefoot, his posture loose like he belonged there. He stretched, then yawned, then reached for a coffee mug, the best wife ever one Curtis gave me our second Christmas. The one he said reminded him of my sarcasm. The man wasn't Curtis, he was younger. Maybe late 20s, lean, with that smug, barefoot in someone else's house confidence I hadn't seen in years. He looked around like he was deciding what to cook for breakfast. Scout, my dog, sat beside him on the floor, wagging her tail. I blinked. My hand shot to my mouth. He squatted to scratch behind her ears like he'd done it 100 times before. She looked happy, familiar. Then came the punch I didn't see coming. He was wearing my Seahawks sweatshirt, the one I used to sleep in when Curtis deployed. The sleeves were too long on him, but he didn't seem to care. I tapped into the camera archive and rewound a few hours. There, in the driveway, Curtis's car parked, door wide open. The stranger walked out from the passenger side. Curtis leaned in, kissed him hard, then handed him the house key. And just like that, the footage became unbearable. He hadn't just replaced me. He was replacing me. The space I designed, the dog I raised, the life I tried to build while he was busy scripting his escape, all of it, repurposed like I never existed. I paused the footage and just stared at the still frame. I wasn't crying. I was too stunned for that. My mouth had gone dry. My throat itched with something I couldn't name. Then I remembered a conversation, a month before I left for Romania. We were eating takeout on the couch, pad thai, his favorite, and Curtis had mentioned maybe finally building that deck in the backyard, said he'd been talking to a contractor. You know, refinance, he added casually. Maybe update the kitchen too. Might raise the value if we ever decide to move. I'd nodded, tired, distracted, trusting. That's when he pulled out some paperwork. Just to get the process started, he said. I remembered barely skimming it, just seeing our names on top. My name was likely just printed. His plan, whatever it was, had been in motion long before I boarded the plane. I felt sick. I saved all the footage and sent it to my encrypted drive. Then I added it to a folder I named Lennox Deception, a file for every lie I had yet to confront. After a moment's hesitation, I drafted a new email to Malcolm Quaid. Curtis didn't know I still talked to Malcolm, my former law school classmate, now a litigation lawyer in Austin. Subject line, need to talk, urgently, confidential. I didn't include a message. The footage would speak for itself. Before hitting send, I watched one more clip. The stranger, now shirtless, poured himself another cup of coffee. Behind him, a frame sat on the kitchen shelf. A picture of Curtis and me from our 5th anniversary in Seattle. The man picked it up, stared at it, then tossed it face down on the counter. I don't know what burned hotter, anger, shame, or the clarity that Curtis never planned to keep anything sacred. That night, I didn't sleep. I laid there, back against the stiff hotel mattress, watching the slow spin of the ceiling fan, and made a promise to myself. I wasn't going to let this end with an email. Curtis thought this was about marriage. He had no idea he'd just declared war. I stayed up until sunrise, watching clips of my house like I was a stranger peering into someone else's life. There was something almost surreal about it, like I'd slipped through a crack in reality and landed in an alternate timeline where I didn't exist. But Curtis had built more than a new life while I was gone. He'd built a story. The morning after I sent Malcolm the security footage, I opened Facebook out of habit, half expecting to see something mundane. Instead, I found myself tagged in an old neighbor's post. It was a backyard photo. Burgers smoking on a grill, red Solo cups, lawn chairs, laughter. In the corner of the frame was Curtis, standing there like nothing in his world was broken. The caption read, "Proud of how strong Curtis is after everything he's been through. Resilience looks good on you, brother." Comments flooded in under the post. "So sorry she did that to you. Some women just don't appreciate loyalty. You're better off now." The bile crawled up my throat. I clicked on Curtis's profile. He hadn't blocked me, just pretended I didn't exist. His posts were full of smiling group shots, weekend brunches, and healing quotes like, "Sometimes letting go is the best self-care." He was marketing grief he didn't earn. I kept scrolling, my chest tightening with every photo. There was a picture of Scout playing fetch in the park with a caption, "My rock during the worst year of my life." I almost dropped the phone. He was rewriting everything, telling our community that I had left him, that I'd chosen my career over family, that he tried to save the marriage, but I'd grown cold. One comment from a woman I used to babysit for read, "It's always the strong, quiet ones who suffer the most." Suffer? He emptied our accounts, forged my name, moved his boyfriend into our home, and I was the villain in this Hallmark melodrama? I clicked into a neighborhood group thread. They were discussing me like I'd vanished mid-conversation. One message stood out in particular. "She ran off with some guy in Europe. I hear she barely called home. Curtis was heartbroken." Heartbroken? That man hadn't cried when I left. He hadn't begged me to stay. He had handed me a hug like it was a handshake. That wasn't heartbreak. That was closure. His version, signed and sealed before I even boarded the flight. I remembered a voice message from him 2 months ago, just 23 seconds. "Hey babe, hope you're good. Everything's fine here. Scout misses you. I'll call later." He never did. And now I knew why. What really pierced me wasn't just the lies, it was how easily people believed them. Friends I'd known for years, neighbors who waved at me every morning for a decade, people who'd once shared our dinner table. They swallowed his narrative without question. One comment hit like a sucker punch. "At least he still has Scout. That dog's been through enough." Scout, the dog I rescued after my father died, the one who slept on my chest the night I collapsed from grief. Curtis didn't even want a dog. He used to say, "What's the point if it can't talk back?" But now, Scout was part of his pity campaign. Another piece of my life folded into his story like I was just a rough draft he edited out. I whispered out loud, "He even stole my dog." That's when something inside me flipped, not like a switch, more like a fuse, quiet, hot, steady. I opened a blank document and typed in bold at the top, "Curtis Lennox, fabricated narrative." Below it, I started listing everything he claimed versus what actually happened. She abandoned me. I deployed to Romania under contract. She made me refinance the house. He suggested it and forged my approval. She never called. I have call logs and unanswered messages. Line after line, I created a map of the web he'd spun. Not for revenge, not yet, but because the truth was a rope, and I intended to climb it, hand over hand, until I stood above every lie he told. I didn't post a rebuttal. I didn't comment on the threads. I got quiet. Because Curtis built his version of events on sympathy and whispers, but I knew something he didn't. Lies are soft. They comfort people. But truth has weight, and eventually, weight sinks. By the end of that week, I had collected enough lies to build a bonfire. But what I needed was proof, something solid, something that didn't rely on my word against his. I didn't just want to expose Curtis. I wanted to corner him, document by document. So I did what I should have done weeks ago. I called the bank. The woman on the other end of the line was polite, cheerful even. She probably had no idea that her routine verification steps were unraveling what remained of my marriage. I requested a full copy of the refinance paperwork, anything with my name, my initials, my signature. She said it might take a day or two. It took exactly 42 hours. The PDF arrived as an attachment in an email with the subject line, "Requested documents, Lennox Mortgage." I downloaded it, opened the file, and there it was. My name at the top of page 1, right under the words, "Signatory, Rowena Briggs." At first glance, the signature looked fine. Familiar strokes, proper slant. But then, my eyes caught something. The middle initial was wrong. I always sign Rowena M. Briggs. This one had a clean, looping L, and the tail of the G in Briggs curved too sharp, too deliberate. Mine always flicked slightly upward, like a hesitation mark. This one was firm, practiced. I pulled out my passport from the drawer, set it next to the screen, and stared at the two side by side. They weren't the same. It wasn't a mistake. It was forgery. The next morning, I FaceTimed Malcolm. He answered from what looked like a conference room, messy shelves behind him, coffee in one hand, tie loosened like he'd been up half the night. I held the phone up to the screen. "This is forgery, right?" I asked. He didn't hesitate. "Absolutely. And based on the details, it looks like the refinance pulled out nearly $330,000 in equity." My breath caught. "From the house?" "Yeah. And with your name on the original mortgage and deed, that money was extracted from your asset, without your legal consent." I leaned back against the couch, staring at the ceiling. "He didn't just fake my name," I whispered. "He stole my inheritance." There was a long pause before Malcolm asked, "Want me to run a deeper check on the loan officer who approved this?" I nodded, then ended the call. But my mind wasn't on the bank anymore. It had slipped backward, to a different living room, smaller, cluttered, filled with the smell of homemade chili and lemon furniture polish. My father's living room. I remembered sitting on that same couch 6 years ago, the day after we buried him. The house was quiet except for Scout, curled at my feet, and the ticking wall clock above the mantel. The will had been simple. No long speeches, just a letter and a modest inheritance, enough to start over, he'd said, to build something that's yours. That money became the foundation for the Austin house. Every square foot of drywall, every brushed nickel fixture, I had chosen them. Curtis hadn't even cared, he just said, "Whatever makes you happy." And now, he had turned it into a payday. One I never agreed to. The violation was no longer about lost money. It was about what that house represented. He didn't just betray me. He dismantled the one thing my father had left behind. I stood up, chest tight, and grabbed the stack of folders from my suitcase. I hadn't touched them since arriving in Bucharest. They held every copy of the house deed, the original loan approval, even the inspection report from 2019. I scanned each one, encrypted the files, and uploaded them to my secure cloud. Then I opened a new folder titled Counterclaim Prep. Next, I drafted an email to Malcolm, attaching a side-by-side image of the forged signature and the one from my passport. I didn't even add commentary. The contrast was clear. Then I opened another document and started typing. Timeline of deception, Curtis Lennox. Every date, every false promise, every transaction, every clue I had ignored because I believed in the man I married. My hands didn't tremble anymore. There were no tears, no shaky exhales, just steady keystrokes. It felt like building something again, except this time, it wasn't drywall or tile, it was truth. And truth wasn't fragile. It couldn't be sold, silenced, or signed away. Not anymore. The cab dropped me 3 blocks from the motel just after midnight. No fanfare, no headlights waiting in the driveway. I carried a single suitcase, a backpack, and a list of names that had gone from familiar to dangerous in the span of 3 months. I didn't text Curtis. I didn't call anyone. I moved like a ghost in the town I used to call home. The front desk clerk at the roadside motel didn't ask questions when I signed in under the name Lena Carter. I gave him a fake out-of-state ID Malcolm had prepared and paid in cash. He handed me a key card and pointed me toward room 117 with the kind of indifference you only learn from years behind bulletproof glass. The bed creaked. The air smelled faintly of bleach and damp carpet. It was perfect. I didn't unpack. I pulled out my laptop and reopened the folder labeled Counterclaim Prep. Then I opened the second folder Malcolm had sent, Listings Unauthorized Real Estate Transactions. At the top of the stack was the one that mattered, my house. The listing date was 2 weeks ago. The agent's name was Tobias Ryan. The asking price was well below market with a note that read, "Seller motivated, ready for fast close." There was a scanned copy of a contract. My name was on it. So was a signature that looked like mine, if you weren't me. But even a half-trained eye would spot the problems. The notary stamp was from a county I'd never lived in. The witness signature belonged to someone named Jenna Barnell, who, according to a quick background check, had been fired from a title company 2 years ago for procedural dishonesty. This wasn't just Curtis being sloppy. It was systemic, coordinated. I shut the laptop and rubbed my temples. The next morning, I met Malcolm in person for the first time in 7 years. The diner we chose was 20 miles outside Austin, tucked behind a gas station that hadn't updated its signage since 1992. The waitress poured coffee without asking and called everyone hun. Malcolm was already seated when I arrived, folders stacked on the table, legal pad open. "You look different," he said, eyeing me over his glasses. "War'll do that," I replied. He slid a folder toward me. "This is the one. The signature doesn't match your original mortgage documents. We've got grounds for a civil claim and possibly criminal fraud depending on how deep this goes." I flipped through the pages, then I stopped. There was a second document, a contract between Curtis and Tobias, not as seller and agent, but as business partners under a recently registered LLC. Their names were side by side, both listed as managing partners. The LLC's business address? My house. My fingers tightened around the paper. "He used my address to register a shell company?" I asked. Malcolm nodded. "And funneled the refinance funds into it. There's a trail, but it's messy." I closed the folder and pushed my coffee aside. My appetite was gone. "I want to see the house," I said. "You sure?" he asked. "I need to." He handed me the keys to his rental. "Don't park in front, just be smart." The drive was quiet. Familiar streets blurred past like ghosts refusing to wave. I parked halfway down the block and killed the engine. The house looked the same from the outside. Blue shutters, white trim, mailbox slightly crooked. But the porch lights were on, curtains drawn, a shadow moved inside. Tobias. His car was in the driveway, parked where mine used to be. The audacity made my stomach twist. He wasn't just living in my house, he was living in it like he built it. I watched for 20 minutes. Nothing happened. Just the soft glow of lights, the flicker of a TV behind the blinds, and Scout's faint silhouette at the window. She looked toward the street, head tilting like she sensed something. I almost opened the door, almost called her name, but I didn't. Instead, I pulled out my phone and typed, "You have 24 hours to undo this before I make it your worst mistake." I stared at the words, then I hit delete. No. They didn't deserve warnings. They deserved the one thing Curtis never expected, a consequence. So I started the engine, and I drove away. I was sitting in Malcolm's car, engine off, parked 3 houses down from the one that used to be mine, when the black SUV rolled up without headlights. 2 more followed, unmarked but unmistakable. Government plates, low-profile builds, the kind that don't need to scream authority because everyone already knows. The agents moved in silence, coordinated, precise. I didn't breathe. From my vantage point behind tinted glass, I watched the team split. 2 flanked the porch, another position near the garage. Then came the knock. Not frantic, not polite, just 3 firm raps and a badge held high. Curtis always used to say, "Nobody knocks unless they want something." He was right. Except this time, it wasn't me they wanted. 3 months ago, I was halfway across the world, neck-deep in NATO cybersecurity policy meetings, trying to build something bigger than myself. Curtis knew my schedule to the hour. He knew when I'd be flying, when I'd be off-grid, when my work would consume every waking minute. That's when he made his move. And now? Now I was watching him reap the cost of believing I'd stay silent. The front door opened slowly. A sliver of light cut across the porch. I saw Tobias first, barefoot. Shirt wrinkled, hair unkempt. He looked confused, sleepy. Maybe he thought it was a delivery or a neighbor. Until Agent Patel stepped forward and spoke. He tried to close the door. They didn't let him. I'd met Patel just once, over a secure video call from her DC office. Her tone back then had been measured, professional. But her eyes had fire. She wasn't the type to entertain drama. She wanted facts, paper trails, chain of custody. I had given her all 3. It started 3 weeks ago when I sent her the full dossier. Falsified refinancing documents, side-by-side signature comparisons, hidden camera footage, metadata timestamps, the whole network Curtis thought he'd buried. I even included a folder labeled Anonymous Source Internal Bank Activity. That source was someone I hadn't spoken to in over a decade, Carmen Simmons. We shared a dorm room sophomore year. She went into banking, I went into public policy. We lost touch, until she saw my name come through on a flagged wire transfer from a liquidated equity draw. She reached out via encrypted VoIP with one sentence, "Ro, I can't sleep knowing what I know." Turns out, Curtis hadn't just pulled cash from the house. He'd rerouted over $120,000 into an LLC controlled by Devlin Moore, a name that, until now, hadn't even been on my radar. Devlin specialized in flipping distressed properties and had been fined twice for paperwork discrepancies in past cases. Now he was sitting in my living room, sipping coffee and watching late-night crime shows while laundering stolen equity from a house built on my father's inheritance. Until the FBI walked through the door. 10 minutes in, Devlin was the second one out in cuffs. Curtis came last. He tried to play calm, talking with his hands, throwing around words like misunderstanding and technical error. Patel didn't blink. Donovan read him his rights while two agents boxed up files, electronics, and everything else they needed. Curtis spotted me as they were putting him in the car. I didn't wave. I didn't smirk. I raised my phone and hit record. 3 seconds of video. No commentary. Just a timestamp, badge flashes, and a man in handcuffs who thought he was untouchable. Then I forwarded it to Malcolm. Subject line: Stage 1. Complete. There was no celebration. No victory dance. Just silence. And a sense of gravity shifting. They had underestimated me. That was their first mistake. Thinking I'd disappear, that was their last. By the time the courthouse clerk updated the case file with released on bond, I already knew what would happen next. Curtis and Devlin walked free less than 48 hours after the arrest. Predictable. They had money, lawyers, connections. Justice, it seemed, was still a luxury bought in bulk. But what I didn't expect came 2 hours later. Tobias had filed a motion from jail. Emotional distress, unlawful surveillance, and digital defamation. I blinked at the screen, rereading the document 3 times. He was suing me from behind bars. It was a page straight from Curtis's playbook, a strategy cloaked in victimhood. They weren't going to fight with facts. They were going to fight with smoke and mirrors. The next morning, Curtis's lawyer stood outside the Travis County Courthouse, speaking into a sea of microphones with the smugness of a man who'd never felt consequence. My client has endured months of harassment by a woman who clearly struggles with mental instability. Her accusations are not only unfounded but dangerously obsessive. I watched the clip on my phone, muted. The image was enough. Curtis standing in the background, arms folded, nodding solemnly like he was the one who'd been betrayed. Their war wasn't just legal. It was reputational. And I knew how these things worked. Whispers louder than truth, headlines built on drama, and a public eager to believe the simplest version of a story. Especially when that story came from a man who smiled well in a suit and said, "I just want to move on." That night, I met Malcolm at a quiet strip mall cafe on the east side. We ordered black coffee and sat at a booth with our backs to the wall. He slid a USB drive across the table. "Tobias Wren," he said, or as he used to go by, TJ Wallace. My hand froze on the cup. "He changed his name?" I asked. "Twice," Malcolm confirmed. 2 civil suits for fraud, Arizona and New Mexico, both dropped when the women mysteriously backed out, but the pattern's the same. Tobias targeted women in financial distress, cozy up to them, convince them to refinance or co-sign, then list the home under the radar and disappear with the proceeds. A predator, not sloppy, strategic. "And now he's hiding behind a legal claim of distress," I muttered. Malcolm's face hardened. "We'll dismantle it." That same week, Patel looped us in with new findings from the FBI's forensic team. The evidence was worse than expected, and better. Devlin had already listed my home weeks before I ever touched U.S. soil. The buyer, an LLC tied to Tobias's former partner in Flagstaff. The paperwork was 90% complete, awaiting only a digital signature. They had set up a spoof email in my name. If the system hadn't flagged the metadata, my house would have changed hands, legally, under a false identity. They weren't just stealing homes, they were laundering them, and the FBI had caught it, just in time. But predators don't go down without dragging claws. That night, I returned to my motel room late, drained, ready to collapse. The lock wasn't broken, nothing stolen. But I knew the moment I stepped inside, someone had been there. The air felt off. A window was slightly cracked, my papers had been moved, scattered on the bed like a warning. My folder labeled Court Drafts was open. I froze. Then slowly I walked in, closed the door, and locked it behind me. No message, no threat, just the quiet implication. We can reach you. I sat on the bed, staring at the mess. I didn't cry. I didn't call Malcolm. I gathered the pages one by one, restacked them, placed the folder back in my bag, zipped it shut, and whispered, "They should have finished the job, because now I'm wide awake." I'd let Curtis smear me, Tobias stalk me, and Devlin use me. But now, I wasn't a target anymore. I was the last witness standing. The courtroom was cold, over-air-conditioned, the kind of chill meant to keep tempers in check. I sat at the witness stand in a dark blue blazer and no jewelry, hair pinned back, face bare. I wanted nothing about my appearance to distract from what I came to do. Tell the truth. Agent Patel had warned me this might happen. "You'll be the anchor witness," she said. "The linchpin." I didn't flinch. I'd been the target of their operation. Now I was its undoing. Everything I had built, surveillance footage, signature analysis, wire transfers, the fake listing documents, had been woven into a single, clear timeline. One that didn't just detail what they did to me, but what they had done to others. 5 women, 5 different states, same pattern. Emotional leverage, forged signatures, quick sales, shell companies. Devlin and Tobias had been operating together since 2019. Tobias seduced. Devlin laundered. Curtis? He gave them access. I handed the flash drive to the bailiff, and as the screen lit up behind me, I felt nothing but calm. "I first noticed inconsistencies in our bank account 2 months before I deployed to Romania," I said. My voice was steady, each syllable shaped by restraint, not fear. As I walked the court through the documents, even the defense attorneys stopped objecting. What could they say? Their clients had signed everything. The lies were their own handwriting. When the surveillance video of Devlin using my coffee mug played, a woman in the jury covered her mouth. I didn't look at Curtis once, until the recess. He approached me quietly, just outside the courtroom doors. No handcuffs, yet. Just a pale face and shaking fingers. "Ro," he started. I didn't move. Let him squirm. "I didn't know how far it would go. I didn't want to lose everything. Tobias said it was temporary. You weren't even here. I thought we'd work it out eventually." He sounded like a teenager who got caught shoplifting, not a man who stole a house and forged a life. "Ro, please," he murmured. "I didn't mean for it to be like this." I tilted my head and spoke softly so no one else would hear. "I never left." His face crumpled. He looked down, like the words had taken the last bit of oxygen from his lungs. He never noticed me disappearing. Not because I did, but because he stopped seeing me long before I packed a bag. The trial concluded 2 days later. Tobias and Devlin both accepted plea deals: federal conspiracy, identity theft, financial fraud. They would serve time, not forever, but long enough for their careers and reputations to end where they belonged, in the gutter. Curtis didn't go to prison, but he signed over every financial asset. My house, the pension he tried to claim, every dollar he pulled from our accounts, full restitution. In return, the federal charges were dropped, but he'd never practice real estate again, never own a license, never rebuild the clean man image he wore like a suit. He tried to speak at the final hearing. "I've made terrible mistakes," he told the judge, "but I've learned from them." The judge stared at him for a long, empty second. "You didn't learn," she said. "You got caught." I didn't keep the house. Too many memories. Too much betrayal soaked into the walls. But I kept the title, because I earned that, and because sometimes justice doesn't come with a ribbon. It comes with receipts. I stood in the hallway for a long moment, just looking at the walls. The paint Curtis picked, eggshell white, still looked fresh, but it felt like it belonged to someone else now. I ran my hand along the edge of the doorway one last time and stepped outside, pulling it shut behind me. That was the last time I saw the Austin house. I didn't need to sell it, but I chose to. It wasn't about money. It was about energy, memory, closure. There are places that witness your best days and others that survive your worst. I didn't want to live inside the ruins of what they'd tried to make of me. The house sold in 30 days. Cash buyer, clean deal. I didn't pack much. Just a few boxes, some old notebooks, the photo of my father on the porch, smiling in his cowboy hat the day I got the keys. He never stepped foot inside, but I always thought he'd be proud of what I built. Now, I think he'd be prouder that I knew when to let go. I bought a small cabin in Texas Hill Country, wrapped in oak trees and silence. It was nothing like the house in the city. No smart thermostat, no doorbell camera, just a rusted mailbox, a wooden porch, and a view of the stars so wide it made your breath hitch. Scout adjusted right away. He slept at the foot of my bed again, like he never left. Sometimes he watched the woods like he was waiting for someone to come back, but eventually, even he stopped expecting a knock. The past didn't vanish. It sat with me sometimes, on the porch, in the quiet moments before sleep. But it no longer dictated the tempo of my breath or the tightness in my chest. It was just something I'd survived. One rainy afternoon, I opened the mailbox and found an envelope addressed by hand. No return address, North Carolina postmark. Inside was a folded sheet of lined paper and a note written in neat, blue ink. "You don't know me, but the FBI said your case helped save my home. I'm married to a Navy man. We almost signed the same papers. Thank you for being brave when it would have been easier to disappear." I stood on the porch in my slippers, rain splattering against the wooden steps, rereading the note. Something about it cracked me open, not painfully, but softly. I walked inside, stuck it on the fridge with a magnet shaped like a cowboy boot, and just stood there. I hadn't saved the world, but I'd saved someone's, and that was enough. I didn't track Curtis anymore. Last I heard, he moved back to Lake Charles, Louisiana. Back to his mother's house. No job, no license, no partner. His name popped up in an online article once. The comments were brutal. Not that I relished it, I just didn't feel anything. The law hadn't caged him, but life had. As for Tobias and Devlin, they were both serving time. Fraud, identity theft, conspiracy across state lines, and probably more to come depending on what else the FBI found. I didn't testify against them for vengeance. I did it because silence would have made me part of the chain that let them keep going. Now, there's no Curtis, no scandal, no storyline to defend. Just me, Scout, a barn full of reclaimed wood, and a calendar that isn't full, but also not empty. I spend most mornings in the shop behind my cabin, working on custom furniture orders. Sanding, measuring, building. It's the kind of work that demands your hands more than your mind, which is exactly what I need. I sell through a small website Malcolm helped me set up. I don't use my full name, just Made by Roe Hill Country, Texas. The woman I used to be, the one who explained her worth through loyalty and rings and shared mortgages, she's still in there somewhere. Sometimes I miss her. But the woman who took her place, she knows her own worth, and she'll never let anyone put a price tag on it again. They took my house. They tried to take my name, but they'll never take what I rebuilt, on my own terms. Sometimes the greatest battles we fight aren't in courtrooms or confrontations, but in choosing not to let betrayal define us. Rowena's story is a reminder that even when everything is taken, you still get to choose who you become next. Have you ever had to rebuild your life after someone you trusted broke it? We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. And if this story moved you, if you believe in justice, in strength, in starting over, don't forget to subscribe. More true-to-life stories like this are coming your way.